All right, hi, my name's Corey. I'm going to start by apologizing because I see some of your faces are back, and so there is going to be a little bit of stuff that's the same. So you're going to have to hear my spiel again because I usually like to do this because I always appreciate understanding where a presenter is coming from. I always wanted to be a high school math teacher. That was my goal since I was really, really young. And I got to Maryland, took Calc 1, and got a 50 on the pre-calc pre-test he gave our class. And I think our class average was, well, no, I got lower than that. Our class average was a 50. And the guy goes, oh, well, I guess you all aren't ready. And then he just trucked along with Calc 1. And I did not do very well. I was 18 years old, not balancing social life with schoolwork and other stuff I was doing at the time. And so I ended up switching out of majoring in math because of that experience, and then ended up going into elementary ed and loved it. And the reason I'm sharing this is a lot of you are probably general education teachers, and that's what I was. I got into SPED merely because my first year on the job, half of the kids in my class had an IEP, and then a bunch of other students also had a Section 504 plan, and that one course we all take, the Intro to SPED course that's offered, was not enough. And so that's why I'm in special education now. And sometimes I'll try to talk to people and they're like, oh, you're in SPEDs, and they won't talk to me. And I was like, I actually was a general education teacher. And so a lot of what we're going to talk about today, how many of you work as coaching teachers at all? Anyone doing some coaching of teachers? Excellent. Okay. A lot of what we're going to talk about today is just generally effective to enhance the quality of core instruction. And then we'll talk about what that would look like to enhance intervention as well. Oh, and this is my email. I'm in Oklahoma. And you can always email me. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'll go back to it at the end. So we're going to start by defining some things. Oh, by the way, I want to give I kind of stole this from the ABCs of CBM. Has anyone ever read that book? What? Okay, it's one of the greatest books ever. It talks about curriculum-based measurement. And it's awesome. So I kind of stole it from them, so don't tell them. So we'll start by defining some terms. Then we'll talk about variations and applications. Talk about some rate of usage. And then honestly, that last bullet point is a little bit of just everything under the sun. I got a little bit all over the place. And I'm just going to talk about what this could look like in various applications. So has anyone ever seen this before? This 4-step process. Don't ruin it, people who are here before. This is directly from Anita Archer's book on explicit instruction. And so this is the framework that she kind of recommends thinking through of maybe when you introduce vocabulary. And so I promise never to do this again, but will you role play with me for half a second as students? Everyone's okay with that? Okay. Opportunity to respond. Whisper opportunity to respond. Tell it to your peer. Say it really loud. Opportunity to respond. Say it in a super silly voice. How many times did you just say that? 4. How easy was that? Ridiculously easy. So it's kind of funny. Today I'm talking about something all of you are already doing. All of you are giving kids opportunities to respond. So it doesn't sound groundbreaking. So sometimes you're like, what am I going to learn coming to this session? I'm already doing this. And what we're talking about is how can we refine our usage of OTRs to be better for kids. OTRs, it basically, there's a lot of writing around opportunities to respond, but basically it exists within this 3-part sequence. Something is presented to the child. A stimulus is presented, right? Whether it's a question from a teacher, something to study. Following that, the student has to respond to it. And I'm going to talk about this in a second, but there's some sort of response the student needs to provide, and then at the very back end of that, feedback's provided. So clearly, the 3 critical attributes here are kids are told to do something, they do it, they get feedback. Very simple. Okay, so my presentation's over. I will talk to you later, right? So here's an example. A teacher has this on the board and says, what sound? And the whole class will say, k, right? That's an OTR, choral response. Okay, turn and tell your partner something that you treasure. Maybe we're doing vocabulary on the word treasure. Kids turn and talk to go do that. Does everyone see that this would be a nightmare doing choral response? So we are using a different OTR practice, but same principle, prompt, respond, feedback. Actually, I didn't give you feedback on this, but the teacher could then have some examples and say, oh yeah, that is something we treasure, and give some feedback there. Here's two of my favorite non-examples that I see a lot. A lot of my undergrads get nervous when they're out in the field and they're just learning how to teach, and they'll oftentimes be like, oh, does anyone have questions? Great, we're going to move on. That's not an OTR. That's a rhetorical question. Rhetorical questions, this is just a sidebar. Rhetorical questions can be a really bad habit to get into. Because what ends up happening is you are teaching a child, you don't have to respond when I ask a question. You are reinforcing non-response. So I'm really, really bad with that now. I have to catch myself. So if that's something that is in your behavioral repertoire, trying to actively get that out of it can be really helpful. This is my other favorite. The slope is rise over run, right? And then what all the kids say. Right. That's not an OTR. That is also falling within that rhetorical question framework. Is everyone cool with those two? So, turn and tell your partner. Here's another OTR. What is the first step a teacher must do to provide an OTR? Go ahead. Okay, what's the first thing a teacher has to do? Ask a question. I love that. This was a trick question. Yes. The teacher can ask a question, give a question. I would argue the first thing I have to do is pre-plan those. And we're going to talk about this later. Good teachers, really amazing teachers, all of us, we build questions as we're teaching, right? You are generating them, but one of the biggest issues I see with teachers who are struggling with some of this is they don't pre-plan anything ahead of time. And then it is really hard on the fly to begin to generate good OTRs. And so trying to pre-plan some of those can be really helpful. Turn and talk to your neighbor about this one. Why is the feedback component critical to the OTR protocol? What's the role of that feedback? All right, what's the role of the feedback? Anyone? Yell it at me. Yeah, it's a great check for understanding, and then the teacher is providing feedback on whether responses were globally correct or incorrect, and we'll talk about that in a second. So there are variations in how we can think about leveraging OTRs. The three most commonly kind of classified buckets, I see a lot of people nodding heads. If you have a complaint, you can send it to Jared because he asked me to come. So for verbal, right? Verbal, the student is saying something, right? Which is self-explanatory. But even within verbal, we can have different ways that could look, right? Choral response is when you're going to get either a group or a whole class of students to all respond in unison. If you're using choral response, you're going to need some sort of signal to the students of when you want them to respond. Anita Archer has some really good videos where she'll hold her hands up, drop her hands, that's when everyone says it. Create your own symbol, right? But as long as you have a signal that students know, I say it when that happens. We can have peer-to-peer student-to-student dialogue. So you can give an OTR opportunity that might lend itself to student-to-student. This is something I talked about in the first session today. Students can explain something to themselves, right? So you could ask them to repeat it to themselves. That would be a verbal OTR that's going directly to them. And there's a whole lot of research around self-explanations. If any of you want, I have my other slide deck that has some of that stuff from Bethany Riddle Johnson. I can share it with you because there's some. I would recommend embedding some scaffolded support specifically for younger kids with that. All right, is everyone good with verbal? We're cool there? All right. The next one is gestural. And this can come also in a variety of different ways. I've seen teachers do a lot of really cool things with this. Have you all seen those pinch cards, like A, B, C, D? Kids like pinch them. So you would need to pre-plan some of that, but you can use pinch cards to get a quick lay of the land. All students are participating. I've seen teachers do thumb up, thumb down. Some teachers will just use fingers. They might have different hand signals they'll use for different sorts of things. That can be creative, but students are making a gesture. We all cool with that? Lastly, we have written. And so within written, I've seen a lot of teachers use mini whiteboards, the little whiteboards. This is a pro tip. You can go to Lowe's or Home Depot and buy some stuff. I don't remember what you buy, but they will cut it for free, which is pretty nice of them. Then you'll have it. It's way cheaper than trying to buy them in bundle. But those work great. Normal just, I purposely didn't put the word worksheet here because I know that can be a trigger word. But a notebook, just pencil and paper is totally fine. I've seen some of the schools I've been in, kids find it really fun to write on desks in Expo marker, and they do erase, so that would be a written OTR. And then I put this here because I honestly didn't know where to put clickers. Does anyone have eye clickers in their class? Oh, very few of you. Oh, okay, a couple.
Is it like you can use your iPad and stay in the room, and there's the...
I know what you're mean. Like those killer things that you like...
No, that sounds way fancier than what I was thinking. Oh, okay.
I don't like it.
No, I'm thinking of we were all in those 300-person lecture classes and they'd make you click a response to make sure you were paying attention. Those types of things. And so I don't think maybe that's not written. Maybe I should have put that as gestural, but that's where I had it. Now, here's one thing I wanted to talk about before we dive deeper into OTRs. What is cognitive OTR? Well, how would we think about what that means? And so I gave you 2 examples here. Study this worked example, right? We've all seen, perhaps, or we've all done this. Is that an OTR? Would it classify? I don't know. The kids are supposed to be doing a behavior. The behavior is studying the example. Is everyone following me here? It's just really tricky, right? Because is Johnny studying the math or is he thinking about lunch, right? Or think about this problem. And I like to draw the parallel back to this intervention called cover, copy, compare. Does anyone have cover, copy, compare before? Ever seen it? I'll give a quick explanation. So in cover, copy, compare, it's mostly used for declarative facts. So usually it's not used as often for procedural tasks. So something like sums to 18, multiplication facts, it's been used a lot in spelling. And what it is the answers on one side, so it'd say 4 plus 5 is the same as 9, right? 4 plus 5 equals 9. The student studies it, covers it, writes it down, compares their answer, right? And so usually written cover, copy, compares what's done, okay? So students are writing. So if I'm giving students a bunch of those to do, does everyone see those are all just OTRs? A bunch of OTRs. And so you might say, hey, I'm only going to do this for 2 minutes. That's 2 minutes. 2 minutes of time they're doing written OTRs. If I also only had 2 minutes and I did verbal, what do you think happens? What did you say?
Twice as many.
Yeah, someone said twice as many. I'm only repeating you because of the thing. Yeah, students don't have to write. And I don't know if you've seen, students can be really slow, some students. And so merely by switching from written to verbal, there is more practice or OTRs that are given because now we're removing the need to write. Now, cognitive cover, copy, compare, they've also tested. And for that one, the kid just says it in their head. Now, what concerns do you have with saying it in their head? Did they do it, right? And so this is the challenge. Theoretically, it is an OTR. There's just not a tangential product to collect from it. Yeah, and you're going to run into that issue doing verbal OTR in class as well, because you can't walk around and listen to every single student. And so I don't find a need to classify these things, but in a lot of the OTR literature, it talks about doing a behavior that can then be seen. Where if I just say think about it, I can't really see that. All right. Now, this link, I will send you every article in there if you would like to read it. It's a little bit older, but it is on exactly what Jared and Charles are going to be talking about. Oh, just Charles. In an hour? Is this next section? So the instructional hierarchy. And I didn't want to steal their thunder, but part of considering OTRs is we have to then consider where the student's current knowledge is. And because that's going to end up dictating how I might think about using OTRs. So really quickly, I don't want to get into this. Through the instructional hierarchy, it basically says, hey, where is a kid's knowledge on this specific skill? And I want to make this point really clear. This isn't all of math. This would be, what is their knowledge of sums to 18? Is everyone cool with this? So it's going to be a discrete skill. And so we'll classify kids as, oh, currently the skill's in the frustrational range. Meaning if they're doing it by themselves, no support, it's going to be frustrating. Or is the skill in the instructional range? Meaning their accuracy rates are going to be relatively high. They still might be a little bit slow with it, but they're accurate. And then lastly, we have the mastery range, which means they can basically do it pretty effortlessly. From the teacher side of things, what we then do is we say, okay, if a skill's in the frustrational range, they need a little bit more of my support, right? So there's going to be a heavier level of involvement from the teacher here. If it's in the instructional range, we really want to focus on fluency building type things, which means the teachers might be a little bit less involved of doing a lot of explaining. And then lastly, if we're in the generalization, if we're going to be trying to provide generalization, we're really trying to have that student really connect that skill to other chain skills or discriminating between other related skills. And the reason this all comes into play is the matching these things leads to better outcomes. And so if you think about, if we go back to OTRs, for example, when I'm doing fluency building, actually I always do this, I'm going to jump ahead. I'm not going to jump ahead, all right? I will wait. So Matt Burns and Robin Cotting did a paper where they looked at what happens if we correctly are using things that would be considered acquisition when a kid's in the frustrational range, using instructional tactics with kids in the fluency range in instruction. And what they saw is student growth rates are quicker, right? And if I'm doing acquisition when a kid is in the instructional range, their growth is stagnated. And Matt Burns actually did a couple studies where he purposely gave kids the wrong intervention, and the kids like plateaued. He then gave them the correct one, and they all bumped up. He was basically manipulating that. So I say all that. The rate of usage, well, how many OTRs should I be using, right? How many times should I be getting students to respond? And when we look at some, there's actually not as much research as you would think about looking at just observational studies. Going out to schools, collecting this data, which is wild because that's one of the first recommendations everyone says is, oh, all the teachers should just self-monitor their use of these things. Yet we don't have a lot of data sources on this. In this one study by Sutherland and Webby, they found that it was their kids and all of these students were at risk or identified with an emotional behavior disorder. They were getting roughly 0.02 to 0.16 OTRs per minute. Think about that. So if you did the math really quick, which I can't, that would be one every lots of minutes. Yeah, I'm not going to make a fool of myself in front of y'all. In this study, they actually looked at a lot more schools. So this one was very limited in the sample. In this study, I think it was 45 elementary classrooms. And across all those teachers, they were averaging roughly 2.6 opportunities to respond for kids per minute. Is everyone cool with that idea? All right. Now, the reason that this becomes important to really consider is in intervention studies, so when we're trying to increase teachers' OTR rate, what we were seeing was if we can get teachers up to 3 to 5 per minute, kids' on-task behavior, their engagement, and their learning outcomes increase. And so that's the crux, right? How can we get higher than what we're seeing generally in practice? And I can tell you the average was 2.62, right? But there's a lot of heterogeneity. Some teachers were way higher, seeing way more favorable results, which also means there's a lot of teachers that were way lower in their OTR usage and way less favorable results. And so this is kind of Corey ballpark numbers, so bear with me here. The 3 to 5 is what's all you see everywhere, right? So anything, everywhere, you always only see 3 to 5. So 3 to 5 OTRs per minute. Is everyone with me? Mm-hmm. That's what we're shooting for. And to me, I'm like, okay, that makes sense when we're trying to teach a new skill. But if I'm trying to do fluency building, that is not nearly enough OTRs. Because how do we build fluency? It's all about practice. We need to practice, and only getting 3 to 5 practice opportunities per minute isn't enough practice to get there. Have any of you seen the Steph Curry video? It's one of my favorite videos ever. The 3-point shot. He hits 105 in a row. He's just sitting in the corner, just draining threes. No one's seen this? Oh my gosh, I should have put it on here. Anyway, so we just need to increase practice. And so this is where We need to know, what skill am I teaching currently? Where is my kid at? And then what do I need to maybe think about ballparking my OTRs, my OTR rate on? Now, this is going to be really nerdy. Okay, so do we have any like really nerdy people in here? We got a couple. This level of nuance is something our research has been really bad at. So I'm going to be honest with you. This is terrible. And so this is where I am saying, when you're thinking about your own OTR rate, you're coaching other teachers, think through this level of complexity, because we haven't gotten it. So on the other data set, I said, what was the average? You with me? What was the average? So how do you think they got the average? Yeah, they go in, watch a teacher for 20 minutes. They say they had this many in 20 minutes, and then they divide by 20. Is everyone cool there? That is terrible, because theoretically, I could sit up here and talk for 19 minutes and not give any of you an OTR and then say, do these 50 problems. Is everyone with me there? That is a very different learning environment than if those are distributed across time. And so this is where there's a term in this nerdy research design I like called inner response time. And so what you would begin to think about is a teacher gives an OTR, you then start a stopwatch, and you count until another OTR is given. That time length between those two behaviors of OTRs is your inner response time. And so if you think, if you're like ballparking 3 to 5 per minute, that inner response time, theoretically, if they're exactly equally distributed, would have to be what, 15, 20 seconds to get somewhere within that window? And it's just not, it's not something I've seen people investigate deeply. And so I was going to try to build different distributions here, and I got lazy, so don't kill me. But teacher 1, this is going back to my point, right? Their average could be 3 per minute. This teacher's could be 3 per minute. What those OTRs actually looked like in that instructional learning sequence could look very different. Very different. And this is a lot of just anecdotal. This is anecdotes, right? Of me being in some schools in Oklahoma. What I typically see is a teacher talks a whole bunch for like 10 minutes, and then there's a bunch of OTRs at the end. And it's like, no, we can embed OTRs throughout that entire process, which we'll talk about in a second. Does everyone feel okay with this idea? All right, so what is the logic behind why on earth are we getting students to respond? And learning is very complicated, okay? Learning is very complicated. We have a cognitive scientist actually in here, which is making me very nervous, because I'm now going to get into just straight behaviorism, which just breaks it down as there's an antecedent, a behavior, a consequence. This is not probably the best explanation for learning, but it's one of the most simple. There's a stimulus presented, a behavior is provided, and you get a correct or incorrect response to that behavior. This is what it's grounded in. And so when you think about it, an OTR is presented. So if we go back to the letter C, what sound, right? That's the stimulus. The kid then says, or they might say, duh. Well, there's the behavior. And then a consequence says, oh, that was correct, or, oh, no, that was incorrect. Here's how we say it. You then give them another opportunity. That's how learning happens, right? And we learn a lot implicitly and explicitly, and we're just packing in those OTRs for kids to get that feedback of whether what they're thinking is correct or what they're thinking is incorrect. The 2 parts I want to talk about here is, does everyone see we have 2 different aspects of wait time? And so for the first one, when we present the prompt or whatever we're providing as the stimulus, we have to wait. You got to give a little bit of wait time. And so that's where you wait for people to think through what is the answer. What happens if you give too much wait time?
Distraction.
Oh yeah, kids turn and start chatting, right? You've all been there. If you don't give enough wait time, what happens? Frustration, or frustration, or some kids didn't even get a chance to process the question that was asked, which is why I will also add one of the other big things I've seen as big issues, which I didn't include in here, is our questions need to be clear, but as concise as possible. And that calculus professor I was telling you all about, he would talk for like 2 minutes straight and then ask a question and be like, you lost me. No idea what you were getting at. And so the shorter and more concise we can make our questions, the easier it's going to be for students to comprehend what the goal is and then answer it. We also need another wait time period before the feedback. Okay? So there's 2 wait times embedded. Now, one of the things that is always drawn parallel to OTRs is behavior-specific praise. So whenever you look and you go, what's OTRs? You're going to see behavior-specific praise listed right after it. And one of the things about behavior-specific praise, have you all heard of the golden rule of 3 to 1, 5 to 1? So basically, for those of you who might not have heard of this, we are wanting students to receive at least 3 positive statements for every 1 correction we need to. With 5 to 1 being better, and honestly, in a recent study, they found 10 to 1 was better than 5 to 1. They found 15 to 1 was better than 3 to 1. And then they said, it looks to be infinite. And I was like, that's not possible, but I love where you're going with it. I don't know what the exact upper bound you should be shooting for is, but it's a lot. And I always thought this was really interesting. Some of this stuff they actually looked at in healthy marriages first. And then actually looked at workplace climate. So employees who had supervisors who were within this realm were more productive and everything. And then it got moved into, obviously, a lot of school-based research. And so it's interesting. And so one of the things to think through is we want to do behavior-specific praise outside of just academic learning, right? So if you're like, oh my gosh, this kid won't stay sitting in his seat. You know what I'm going to do every time I see him sitting in his seat? I'm going to give him continuous BSP, and then I'll thin that schedule. But I'm going to reinforce that behavior. So we need to do this outside of academic learning. But within academic learning, think about what opportunity you've just given yourself. Every time you give an OTR, what are you guaranteeing you're also going to provide? Behavior-specific praise. You are building a massive piggy bank of BSPs for when you do have to correct something. And I can't express this enough. This is so dang critical for a lot of our students who have not had a great learning history in mathematics. If you think about how often they might have only been given corrective statements on their math, you building in OTRs that allow them to receive that behavior-specific praise for being correct in math is huge. So don't undersell how important this is. So if you can build in a lot of very, very simple OTRs on things you know for damn well they know, right? Even if it's silly, right? They're at least receiving some of that praise for being correct. Now, what do we do when there's errors? This is exactly what I have to kind of coach some of our undergrads in, is they never want to say, ooh, that was wrong. So a student will say something blatantly wrong, and they'll be like, oh, I could see what you were thinking here. And they'll try to massage around it. And I love the intent, right? Because the intent is I don't want to destroy this kid's self-concept as a mathematician. And they're really, really trying, right? Building a relationship. I'm going to tell you that can be one of the most damaging things to do to that student's knowledge of mathematics, though. Because all the student hears is, oh, I was right, when they were blatantly wrong. And so clearly we need a good tone, so you're not going to say, you were wrong, right? But in this process, so if I provide an OTR, there's an incorrect response. The feedback is going to be, oh, that's incorrect. Here's the correct answer. Sometimes this feedback needs to be more verbose than that. Sorry, I didn't unpack that. If you're looking at something like 4 plus 3, you're doing facts, right? You might say 4 plus 3 is 7. And then you'll have them repeat it. If you're doing something that might need a more elaboration, that's okay too, right? That this feedback piece might be longer. But here's my big point of this. This feedback was, no, that was wrong. What do you see as the back half of this circle? You do another very similar problem, so what will we end on? Yeah, and now here's the thing. If I only do this, where am I sitting at with this kid? No. So, sorry. So this was OTR, incorrect. This wasn't correct. You're telling them it's not correct. OTR, they are correct.
Oh, they're not ending on praise.
Yeah, I'm ending on praise, but what is my ratio right now? I'm only sitting 1-to-1. And what did we just talk about? We actually want to be higher than this. And so make sure if you're realizing in your instructional sequence that you're having to do a lot of the corrections, we might need to piggyback and figure out what is happening here. And this is where I know math curriculums can move so quickly and you all face a lot of pressure of like, this is where you need to be. I see this happen a lot for the students that I work with because where they're trying to teach them at is way too far. They're missing so much pre-skill knowledge that it's an almost insurmountable task to get them ready for that. So 2 other things. How many of you are doing MTSS teams? Yeah, I think everyone's hand should be raised here. In Oklahoma, I sometimes have to be like, are we doing it or are we not? So 2 of the things we always talk about is, hey, we're going to do intervention. We need to increase intervention. We're going to increase the time. How many of you have made that decision recently? Oh, this kid's doing 3 days a week for 10 minutes. We're going to do 3 days a week by 20 minutes instead. That's what we do in IEP meetings all the time, right? The other thing we might do is say, oh, we're going to actually cut down the instructional group size. So maybe it was like 10-to-1 and you're cutting it down to 5-to-1. Is everyone following me here? It's wild to me because so often we view these things as like magical little ingredients. You know, it's like ingredients in our intervention toolkit and we're like doing them. But, oh, I'm sorry. What is actually happening when we increase instructional time? So if I was doing 10 minutes and now I'm doing 20 minutes, what's actually happening? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Great. Y'all picked it up. I basically am engaging in this a lot more with that kid. That's what's happening. So time, yeah, we are increasing time, but what's happening in that mechanism is we are now doing this more frequently. Is everyone cool with that idea? When you think about, I'm sorry, I keep pressing the wrong button. When we cut down on the instructional group size, is everyone with me? We cut down, we're like, oh, instead of me trying to teach 30 students, I can cut this down to me and a group of 5 students because I'm doing intervention. What's actually happening there? Well, theoretically, you probably can do more of this. The big thing here is see this feedback step? It's going to be more specific to that student's responses, right? So we're making this cleaner for the child. Because I'm sure you've all seen this in a whole class choral response. 3/4 could be correct and their voices are loud, the other quarter aren't correct. And so this can get muddy for students. And so when we have smaller group sizes, this becomes cleaner because we're able to provide feedback to that individual child. Along with sometimes, I'm sure you've all run into this issue before. Yeah, go ahead. I'll repeat your question.
So what we're seeing right now is that our resource periods are becoming pretty much the same size as a lot of our actual classroom sizes.
Uh-huh.
So I don't see this small group happening as much anymore, although it's intended. What would you recommend in terms of like utilizing that resource time to still engage increased OTRs?
Yeah, so the question, and I'm only repeating this because of the video. The question was, what do you do when you're basically the number of students identified as risk using a screener creates groups that are really large, right? So there's a couple things you could try to do. One of the ones I would say is implementing interventions in the core classroom is going to be useful. And so those 2 people I mentioned earlier, Robin Cotting, Amanda Vanderhayden, and Burns, have recommended doing class-wide intervention using the median of your class average to kind of make decisions with that. The other thing you would perhaps need to look at, this is going a lot deeper into the weeds than you might want, the psychometric properties of your screener. So you got the screener, like they're below the cut score. Those can get super funky if the base rate at your school is really high. And so what you might end up needing to do is switch your screening protocol a little bit. And actually, Dr. Ansari was talking about this, so maybe you can chat with him after. But you might want to change your screening protocol. Instead of just using one, you can end up doing more of a gated screening process. So that can help. The other thing with that is I've seen this year. We're doing a lot of screening at 8th grade to get into this high school program. And what we're seeing is a lot of these 8th graders aren't trying worth a damn on the screener because they know it doesn't matter. And so basically you're now picking up, instead of picking up the kids who can't do the skill, you're picking up performance deficits. And so embedding some sort of can't do, won't do assessment where you beat your score and you give this, you dangle this reinforcement over them to see if they actually can do it. That can help cut down on students that might be identified as risk who aren't. So I hope that helps. We can talk after too. Okay, I lost my train of thought. Smaller group size, we got antecedent behavior. Oh, consequence. The other thing that can happen, which I don't know if you've all experienced this, but you might be like showing something at the board, you do some together, and then what do you usually do after you do some together as a class? Yeah, students might start doing stuff independently. And this is where the breakdown happens. What do we need for learning? They do a problem. Well, a problem's presented, they do the problem, they get feedback. And so in this learning process, if a student goes and does 5 independent problems in a row and they're all wrong, what were we missing from that learning process? The feedback. So now they practice doing it wrong 5 times. And so in small group settings, this is the whole point. The small group settings, this feedback is a lot more immediate, right? And that immediate feedback allows them to correct errors. So that's the other thing that can be really helpful with small group size. Okay, so we talked about that. The other thing with OTRs and dosage, this is a little bit of an older study now, so I would love to see what it might look like. But in that specific study, they looked at students with reading difficulties, upper elementary school. And they found that kids needed up to 12 exposures. They compared a condition that only had 4 exposures to a condition that had 12. Kids needed to be exposed to words 12 times to begin to build a deeper level of knowledge of the word's meaning. And they found that some kids might need even more than that. And so if you think about OTRs for a second, me being like, oh, I checked the box, I did 1 OTR on this thing, that might not be enough, depending on what you're doing. This same study by Sarah Powell looked at math facts, and kids needed a lot of exposure, specifically students who are going to experience math difficulties. Students who are experiencing math difficulties are likely going to need more exposures to begin to retain facts than students who don't. And this is where a lot of math curriculum do not give enough exposures to a variety of concepts. So if you're like, I'm just going to use this and this is it, it likely embedded within it is not giving kids enough opportunities to respond to pick up some of that knowledge. Okay, so matching OTRs to task. Oh no, my animation didn't work. Dang it. Okay, it's okay. I'm going to move on this side. So let's pretend this is our new skill we're going to be teaching. Is everyone comfortable with this? This is roughly 2nd grade, right? I'm not off base there. 2nd grade. So we're doing double-digit addition with regrouping, new skill. My favorite thing to observe is teachers saying, what should I do first? You know how many times I've observed that happen? Brand new skill, they put it up on the board, and their question to students is, what should we do first? That is not an OTR that's worth asking. So what could we ask instead? Right, this is the question, right? I'm telling you we need 3 to 5 per minute. This is brand new. So what can I ask, right? Well, the easiest way to maybe think about some of this is what pre-skills are embedded in this problem. So pre-skills are skills that are needed to do the problem, right? What place value is the 6 in? It's a great OTR question that everyone in the class should have an opportunity to engage with if I'm trying to do this. What is the value of the 6? So those are back-to-back questions. Does everyone see? What place value is it in? Oh, the 1's place. Then what's its value? 6. Let's keep going. What place value is the 2 in? 10's. What is the value of the 2? 20. Oh my gosh, does everyone see this is helping us learn the actual skill? And all we're doing is asking OTRs on the pre-skills. What is 8 plus 6? Does everyone see we would need to do this in the procedure, but theoretically, if we're doing this, the students should be able to do that, right? If we're going to be struggling a lot with 8 plus 6, this is probably too difficult to do at this point. How many 1's are in 14? 4. How many 10s are in 14? 6 10s is the same as? 4 1s is the same as? 60 plus 4 is the same as? How many OTRs was that? 9. And we could have embedded more, right? What number is this? What number is this? How can we read that? 26 plus 38 is the same as what? A number, right? Does everyone see? You can embed them so easily. And it's having students stay engaged. If you use them well, you are building on, you're making them retrieve prior knowledge that's needed for the target skill. And that retrieval practice is really powerful. Okay. I don't think I had anything to add there. So here's my next slide. I'm going to give you 30 seconds. Here is a problem. 43 times 25. How many OTRs would you count in this? So let's say I said, do this problem. How would you count that? Yeah, so it's interesting, right? This is where the crux, this is where when we're talking about OTRs and building, I would say a deeper thinking about them. In a lot of situations, a teacher says, go ahead and solve this. What type of OTR would that be? Verbal, gestural, or written? Probably written. The kid's doing that verbally without writing anything down. More power to him. So it's probably going to be written. Oftentimes, if we're taking data on ourselves, we'd count that as 1. Is everyone with me? I gave 1 OTR. That's what we would kind of think on. This is the new skill. They had 1 opportunity to do it. But the thing you have to think through is there's actually a lot of OTRs on declarative facts within this chain procedure. And so students are getting lots of exposure to declarative facts embedded within this chained skill. And this is where when you're thinking about procedure tasks, if I was talking with the teacher who was trying to teach, have any of you taught writing recently? Go write like a paragraph to like a 3rd grader. Not recently. I've been doing that with my son. It's painful. But it's like, yeah, go write a paragraph. Is that 1 OTR? And this is where, well, no, there's other ways to think about OTRs beyond just that's 1. And so the kid is getting 1 opportunity to do this chain skill. Is everyone with me? It's 1 opportunity to do this chain skill, but there's a lot of steps they are doing within that. And so if I said 3 to 5 per minute, especially if this is new, a kid's not going to be able to do 3 or 5 of these in a minute if this is a new skill. And so OTRs you can embed OTRs in other ways. Sorry, I feel like I'm ranting. So within verbal opportunities to respond, here's the easiest way I like to think about this, and a lot of you have probably already done this. If the answer is short and discrete, choral response is great. Everyone in the class is going to respond at the same time. However, if it's a longer response, choral response will not work well. What is the commutative property of addition, everyone? Go. Oh, y'all didn't want to play along. Does everyone see that would be a mumbled mess? Would not be great for choral response. Let's read this decimal together. Ready?
3 and 2 tenths.
Perfect. 3 and 2 tenths. That one works better. So this is where I can't do choral response answers if they don't fit well, right? You're going to need to either reformat the way you're wording the question or use a different option. I'm sorry, choral response, yeah. If you're not, you can still try to go peer-to-peer. Now, this is those of you who are in my morning session, please forgive me. But I usually like to share this. Turn and talk. Y'all use turn and talk? Okay. I was teaching 5th grade, and I was brand new. I didn't know anything. I thought I was doing a good job. And I was co-teaching with the special education teacher I worked with. And so we're like, bam, we're going to use a lot of turn and talks. That was like one of the things I learned in my undergrad program. These are good things to do. And so I'm like, turn and talk. And the kids would turn, and they would look at each other. They wouldn't say a dang word. Right? That was like some of them. The other kids would turn and they would start talking about the football game last night. So that was another bunch. And then there was another bunch of students who just wanted to talk. And so the one student would say everything they wanted to say. The other student would say everything. And they'd be like, what did your partner say? And they'd be like, I don't know. So you got these different options. And we had to actually sit down and model what it looked like to engage in that behavior of turning and talking. And the reason I'm sharing this with you is if you want your OTR to be meaningful, they have to understand how to engage in that turn and talk. So if you're going to use turn and talks frequently as a classroom practice, in order to use verbal OTRs, you got to make sure they're meaningful. And so taking maybe the first couple weeks of the year, modeling some of them and spending that time, it's going to save you time in the long run and learning because they're going to then use it consistently throughout time. Here's my other favorite. Gina, how many 10s are in 45? Would this be an OTR? Yes. It's an OTR. Yeah, this is my favorite. Sick, I'm going to check out. They said Gina's name, not mine, right? I know you've seen students do this. And so there's a whole thing we can talk about cold calling. I didn't embed this in here because I didn't want to upset anyone. But my overall thought, cold calling is not bad depending on how you use it. So that's Corey's Cliff Note version. But if you're going to use cold calling like this isn't cold. Well, it depends. Gina's hand might have been raised. So it's not cold calling. If her hand wasn't raised, you would consider it cold calling. What do you notice about the restructure of this? Yeah, what's the only difference I did? Gina's name is now at the end, right? That's all I did, and added wait time. And so if you're going to use individual student OTRs, right? Like you want to send a question to an individual student, you're going to do some of that. It's not bad. But if you want all students to actually think about the question, it's going to be really helpful to make sure you don't start with that kid's name because some kids will check out. And then just adding a little bit of wait time so people can think. If you call on Gina right away, what's going to happen? Yeah, they didn't think, right? And so you want to give that time. The other thing I will say about this is, and this comes back to our previous conversation, is I would highly discourage sending questions to students for behavioral reasons. So Charles is off task, and I go, Charles, what is 3 plus 2? Right? Why did I do that? To redirect his behavior. Here's my biggest concern with that. If we're using us asking math questions as a way to redirect behavior, I am teaching Charles that me asking math questions is a punishing thing. I'm trying to punish him talking or being off task. And so I wouldn't use that as your option to redirect Charles, right? We can use teacher proximity. Right? That's easy. Tap the desk. I can say, man, Jared, you are being such a great listener right now. And what does Charles see me doing? Praising, which means that there's reinforcement readily available. He gets his butt back on task. What am I going to do? Everyone? Praise him. Okay, now we're back into the behavior-specific praise paradigm. I told you can't separate OTRs and BSP. They're too hard. All right, so does everyone feel okay with this idea? Being careful about directing questions to students for the wrong reasons. I don't want to talk too much about cold calling per se. But the one caveat I would add is if you're using, does anyone use the little popsicle stick thing? You know, little magic little sticks. If you're using those to try to get a sampling, right? Because we are bad. We inherently, humans. We just bet we're bad. We have bias, right? And so when we just ask questions to individual kids, we are systematically likely picking certain students and not others, which is why the popsicle sticks came around, because ideally it's supposed to randomize a little bit who's getting questions asked, so you get more accurate perception of how everyone's doing with their learning of that. So anyway, just be careful. So for gestural OTRs, we got these different options. I think all of them work great. I've seen teachers use all of them swimmingly. The only this requires a little bit of planning, usually, because you would have to actually generate prompts, that would allow an A, B, C, or D. Whereas some of the other ones are a little bit easier on the fly to be like, yes, no. And the clickers, I will add one part on the clickers. I was a huge fan of them when I was teaching because at least the way our system was set up, it automatically would graph the data for you. So as you're in the midst of that kind of guided practice, like you kind of like taught it, you're doing a little bit of guided practice, you could have students do like 1 or 2, and immediately it says right, wrong for those students. And then you can quickly, if you see a bunch of kids got both correct, you might say, fly along, little birds, and go do a couple independently, whereas other students, you might not want to let them do that yet because they're going to go practice incorrect if you're going to send them independently. This is the only thing I've seen, and I've seen this a lot with like the young little kids, but they're doing like thumb up, thumb down, or like 1, 2, 3 for correct answers. And I always see the one kid looking over at their friend like, what are they putting up? What do they got over there? So you got to be careful with that. But I don't think it's that big. I don't see it as that big an issue. The other thing, written OTRs, talked about it, whiteboards and paper, all of those work great. The one challenge is if you're doing written OTRs on paper, it's going to be hard for you to see everyone's response. So part of that ABC, antecedent behavior consequence, part of that OTR system is we as teachers are getting data back as well, right? So theoretically, everyone says it correct. That is very reinforcing to me because I must be killing it as a teacher. Everyone's wrong. I don't like that as much because that means I'm doing something wrong. And so that feedback loop is really important for us to kind of gauge how well is this going? How well is it not? Do I need to change course? If it's all written and you can't see that quickly, it can just make it a little bit trickier. And so you might need to try to find a way to look at what is written down. Okay. Now within, and this is the group who was in here this morning, I'm very sorry. Within written OTR practice, okay, you can't ignore this idea of, well, what are they practicing, right? How am I going to structure items for them to engage in written practice? Can you give me a thumb up if you've heard of blocked practice before? Okay, a couple people. So this is good then. So blocked practice. In blocked practice, you would basically, I'm going to call our discrete skills A and B. Is everyone cool with that? So when we're doing block practice, it would be like skill A, skill A, skill A, and then we go skill B, skill B, skill B. So they're going to practice a couple in a row of A, then some in a row of B. Is everyone cool with that idea? This is how a lot of sports teams practice, right? And it's like, we're going to practice shooting from the free throw line a whole bunch. We'll practice a bunch of dribbling. The other way you can kind of think about practice is we might interleave skills. So in my written OTRs, my prompts I'm giving to students, instead of going A, B, 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 I might say A, B, B, A, B, A, B. See how they're interleaved? Now, lots of people like to talk about interleaving. So I'll start there. People love to talk about interleaving, how important it is, and all of that. Don't crap on blocked practice. Blocked practice is useful for initial acquisition because students are being able to practice that procedure. So you can think about, okay, these written OTRs, I'm going to make sure it's blocked by that skill so they get some practice together. What we can then do is once I have skills that I'm like, okay, they've gotten through blocked practice, I'm like, they kind of got this one, they kind of got this one, we can then interleave them. And the purpose for interleaving really is we're beginning, in most cases, not most cases, in a lot of cases, we can interleave related skills to see if students can discriminate between the two. Here's a great example. You're third grade, you're teaching area and perimeter. I know you've all done this, right? Area, 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 perimeter, perimeter, perimeter. What happens when you start to interleave area and perimeter? They might make a mistake, right? And so we're trying to have them discriminate between those two different concepts and procedures and which one to employ at what time. This is a Corey tidbit, okay? I've found that when the skills you're interleaving, if you're connecting them together for a reason, it's going to be more beneficial to long-term learning. So the idea of interleaving area and perimeter, those are two things that are likely to maybe confuse. You're teaching them to discriminate between those two, right? Or if I'm doing like addition and subtraction, interleaving, addition, subtraction, interleaving those things. Versus, I'll give you an extreme example, a CVC word, 4 plus 3. A CVC word, 4 plus 3. We're interleaving two things that are totally unrelated. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. Here's one from a textbook. What do you notice about how this practice is structured? And you can ignore number 10. Yeah, it's blocked. Perfect. Everyone's right. It's blocked. There's 4 different skills here, but they're kind of blocked together. So here's scenario 1 and scenario 2. Which of those scenarios would be blocked and which would be interleaving? Perfect. The first one is blocked and the second one is interleaving. The first one, it's a bunch of addition first with an addend missing. The next one's a bunch of subtraction with the subtrahend missing. And then you can see for division multiplication, they're interleaved. Is everyone okay with this idea? Okay. Within thinking through structuring our OTRs, and we're still kind of sitting within written here, when we think about structuring, we have to think about where we are in the learning continuum. And so if this is, does everyone see this chain skill here? This would be like a chain of things you'd be teaching across time. If I'm currently teaching 2-digit by 2-digit addition with regrouping in the ones and tens place, where's that? Far right, which means I would have already taught these other things. How might I think about using blocked practice there? Yeah, we would probably do blocked here. Is everyone cool with this? We're doing some blocked practice here. What could I do with the other ones if I'm assuming that those are known pretty well now? Those would be the things that we could begin to interleave for our written OTR practice. Okay. I actually think... Okay, good. I'm actually almost done. So we can then think about sequencing OTRs. And so have you all ever used worked examples in practice? Anyone used worked examples before? Okay, we got some hands. And so in a straightforward worked example, usually if it's a procedural skill of some kind, it doesn't always have to be a procedure. You would have like the steps. So does everyone see for step 1, the red is what was added. For step 2, the red's what's added. And so I'm saying, okay, I want to embed some OTRs here. So I would tell students, study this, look at it. I might give them like 20, 30 seconds. And then we could begin to add prompts, which are going to be our OTRs. Is everyone okay with the structure here? Why is the 8 below the 6? Because it's in the ones place. Oh, yeah, because 28, that's 8 ones. Is everyone with me here? Does everyone see that's the easiest skill? It's easy. The easiest part of this problem. I started there. In step 1, why is there a 4 below the 8? Perfect. So does everyone see now we're moving harder? So I'll just put all these, put all these up here. But these are just chain skills. You can think about building a chain from more, how do I say this? Things that are more pre-skills down to the new content that's being introduced. The other thing, and I mentioned this to the other session within worked examples, you can also have students study incorrect worked examples. And I know this is like kind of even leaving OTR land, but you can do OTRs on incorrect knowledge, right? One of my favorite things I used to do is I would tell my students to become detectives, and I would purposely make math errors and have them correct me, right? And so you can get them into the habit of trying to really engage in self-evaluation. Now, what I had said previously is I would not ever start here. I would lean toward doing correct worked examples first, making sure they can do that before shifting to correcting errors. Oh, sorry, I forgot I had the questions here too. All right, I think this is the last slide. So this is actually now leaving learning of math. Okay, so we're kind of leaving this realm a little bit. And we're moving into more so thinking about increasing student work performance within class. So I had a student when I taught 5th grade, and I'm not lying to you, this happened like every single time the first 4 months of the school year. I would give her her unit test that our district made us give. Anyone in that boat? Mm-hmm. Math unit test. I would give it to her. She would answer the first 2 or 3, break her pencil, rip the paper, throw it in the trash. She goes, I'm not doing that, right? And so that happened a bunch of times. What the special education teacher I worked with did is she cut out each individual question and ordered them from easiest to hardest. What do you think she did the very first time she got that? Did the whole freaking thing, right? And so one thing we can think through here, and this is something you've probably seen like early childhood. This works amazing for like little kids. But we can think about, it's called the high probability request sequence. And so within the high probability request sequence, what you would do is I would find things kids are very, very likely to do. What are OTRs I can give I know they're going to respond to? Is everyone cool with this idea? I know they're going to respond to it. And so we call those high probability. There's a high probability that kid's going to respond. So does everyone see I have a sequence of 4 here? Sometimes people will do 3, sometimes 4, sometimes 5, but you chain a bunch of those together. So think about that for a second. This prompt is provided. What does the student do? They do the thing. What do they get? BSP. They do that again. Does everyone see we've gone through that 3 or 4 times? That's when you then lay on the low probability one. And you'd be damned, it works really damn well. And it's kind of funny, we all do this. So those of you who are like, Corey, you're full of shit, how many of you create lists? How many of you purposely put on your list things you've already done? It's very common, or even within this, we will purposely knock off easier things and then jump. And so that might not always work out perfectly as this idea does, because it might just be you procrastinating. But oftentimes, us knocking out some small stuff will lead to, let me go do the low probability. And so that's basically what this, and it's called the high probability request sequence, but it's kind of, you can find a lot of writing on it around the idea of behavioral momentum. And they've actually done this in math specifically. And so mostly within my field of like working with students with math risk or students with emotional behavior disorder, identify with emotional behavior disorder, they've done some of this. So you can imagine I present a long division problem. The student's like, I'm not doing that, right? Well, in a couple of the studies, they do like addition, subtraction, long division. And what do you think they found? It increased the likelihood that kid was going to actually engage in the long division. And so sometimes thinking through how to sequence things for some kids can be beneficial, and it all comes down to leveraging that OTR process. All right, math games. How many of you use math games? Math games. This is. I'm straying a little bit here, but I already warned you. I warned you that there was a little bit of just kind of hodgepodge I included. So why do we use math games? Usually it can be helpful if we have centers or something. We can differentiate practice. Some kids can get different practice than other kids, and it works well for that reason. Remember the instructional hierarchy? Remember that? Is it going to be beneficial for everyone to do fluency practice on the same math skill in your classroom? Probably not, right? Because they're going to be at different levels of what is in their instructional range. So we can differentiate by doing some of this. And oftentimes I hear at least teachers say, it's fun. Kids want to do it. Now, here's the caveat. I've watched too many teachers pay teachers in Pinterest games downloaded off the internet where the mechanism of the game allows for 1 OTR per minute. So think about that for a second. Moving pieces around, doing whatever else I've seen. If I'm only getting 1 opportunity to respond per minute, is that fluency practice? No. We just said that's even too low if it was like kind of teacher leading stuff. We need to be much higher than that. So be careful make sure if you're going to design something yourself or pull something, I would trial run it, and I'm being serious here, observe it happening and see what the OTR rate is. Okay, now this is for those of you coaching or wanting to enhance your own practice. First thing here, build routines. This is something I already said, but I put it up here so I didn't forget. Teach students how to do core response. Teach them what your signal is going to be. It's going to save your life throughout the length of the school year. Same thing with turn and talk. Same thing with whiteboard, and same thing with gestures. So just teach students the routines you're going to use. Self-monitoring is one of the most powerful interventions, and all of us avoid doing it. Have any of you ever monitored how many minutes a day you're engaging in exercise? It changes your behavior. And then we're just like, I'm not doing that anymore because I hate it, right? But self-monitoring works really, really well. And so if you're trying to enhance your own behavior, just start taking some data. See what your OTR rates are like right now, and then you can work on trying to increase them. I found it really hard when I was teaching to do this, but the one I liked was painter's tape. Painter's tape, tally marks on my wrist, that was how I counted my OTRs, because I wasn't going to buy a clicker. But some people, you know the little clickers, everyone familiar? You can do one of those each time you ask one. You can do paper clips. The other beneficial thing is you can ask a peer, one of your peers, to come try to watch maybe a 10-minute clip, and you can take some data. To get a ballpark estimate, what is your baseline for OTRs? Is it high enough? Is it not high enough? You can consider the quality of the OTRs you're asking as well. If that's not enough and you're doing coaching, so this is now for you helping other teachers. If that doesn't change it enough, have them create a graph. Because there's nothing more motivating than seeing your own data graph to be like, man, it's not improving. And then you can start to embed goal setting on top of it. The other things that have been looked at a little bit is lesson planning and embedding OTRs within the materials being used. So if you're like creating slide decks or doing something, by actually prompting yourself with, here's the prompt I'm supposed to ask for all kids, it's going to make you do it, right? You're not going to just ignore it usually. So that can help. The other thing a couple people have tried to do in a couple research studies is they will actually set prompts on an Apple Watch. Or they've used different types of devices. So basically they'll stagger it where it will vibrate on a schedule. So maybe like somewhere within 30 seconds it's going to vibrate on your wrist, and that is your cue. Oh crap, I should be doing an OTR somewhere within this bandwidth. And they use it as a tactile prompt to increase OTR usage. And okay. All right, so that's all I have. This will take you to a dumpster file that includes links and resources on a lot of stuff for math, not just OTRs. So there's like so much stuff in there, and it's all in there. This is a shorter URL for it. But as I mentioned before, if you want my email, you can send me an email, and I'd love to talk about anything related to math. I know today we didn't talk that much about math. It was more about OTRs.
It's not working, or is it just?
This one's not? Dang it.
QR code?
Did you try the short URL?
No.
Write that down. The QR code I might have screwed up.
The URL works.
The URL works? Okay. I'm sorry. I must have made a mistake on the QR code. It's just short URL J06. It's a 0? All right, so this is a 0. But if you email me, I'll also send you everything.